There's a moment in every artist's life that no one ever sees. A moment when the curtains close, the spotlights fade to black, and the silence of solitude becomes deafening. For Michael Jackson, the man who filled stadiums with hundreds of thousands of people screaming his name, these moments were far more frequent than any fan could ever imagine. Somewhere between glory and pain, between thunderous applause and the emptiness of a hotel room, there existed a Michael that the world rarely knew. A Michael who cried alone. A Michael who carried wounds so deep that not even the adoration of millions could heal them. Michael himself once admitted to being profoundly lonely despite his fame. He spoke about how people wanted to rescue him from his solitude, but he felt his loneliness was something he wouldn't wish upon anyone. He considered himself one of the loneliest people in the world, a haunting confession from someone surrounded by millions of adoring fans. This story is about that audio. A recording that few people know about. An accidental capture made by a fan who recorded the king of pop in his most vulnerable moment. Crying alone, without masks, without performances. Just a man confronting the pain he carried throughout his entire life. Prepare yourself. What you are about to discover will forever change the way you see Michael Jackson. If this story touches your heart, share it with other fans who love Michael Jackson. Leave your comment telling us which moment of Michael's life moved you the most. And subscribe so you don't miss any story about the eternal legacy of the King of Pop. It was a cold November night in 1987. The Bad World Tour was at its peak, and Michael Jackson had just delivered another historic performance in Tokyo, Japan. 70,000 people had screamed, cried, and fainted watching him glide across the stage as it defied the laws of gravity. Camera flashes illuminated the night sky like falling stars, each one capturing a piece of magic that would be treasured forever. To the world, Michael Jackson was invincible. He was a man who had sold over 100 million copies of Thriller, the best-selling album of all time. He was the artist who had revolutionized music, dance, and music videos forever. He was, without a shadow of doubt, the greatest entertainer the planet had ever witnessed. Every move he made was studied. Every note he sang was worshipped, and every appearance he made caused worldwide hysteria. But that night, while fans returned to their homes carrying memories that would last a lifetime, something different happened behind the scenes at the luxury hotel where Michael was staying. Something that would forever change the perception of a young Japanese fan named Takashi Yamamoto. Takashi was only 17 years old and worked as a luggage porter at the prestigious hotel where Michael and his entourage were staying. He had specifically sought out this job knowing that his idol would be passing through. Every second of his work shift was dedicated to the hope of catching even a glimpse of the man whose posters covered every inch of his bedroom walls. That particular night, Takashi was assigned to the 20th floor, the floor that had been completely reserved for Michael Jackson and his closest team members. Security was tight, almost military-like. Men in black suits with earpieces stood at every corner, their eyes scanning everyone who dared to walk through those hallowed hallways. Takashi's heart pounded as he pushed his luggage cart down the corridor. The carpet was so thick that his footsteps made no sound, creating an almost surreal atmosphere of silence after the chaos of the concert. The walls were adorned with expensive artwork, and the air smelled of fresh flowers that had been placed in crystal vases every few meters. As he approached room 2012, Takashi noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, but enough for sound to escape into the hallway. He knew he should keep walking. He knew that stopping could cost him his job, or worse, he could be arrested for invading the privacy of the most famous man on earth. But then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was crying, not just any crying. It was the kind of sobbing that comes from the deepest part of someone's soul. It was raw, unfiltered, and absolutely heartbreaking. The kind of crying that tells a story of pain accumulated over years, perhaps decades. The kind of crying that no amount of money or fame could ever stop. Takashi froze. His hands gripped the luggage cart so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Could this really be Michael Jackson? The same Michael Jackson who had just commanded 70,000 people with the confidence of a king? The same Michael Jackson whose smile lit up the entire stadium just hours ago? Almost without thinking, Takashi reached into his pocket and pulled out his small portable cassette recorder. He had brought hoping to record some backstage sounds as a souvenir, maybe capture the distant echo of Michael's voice during sound check. He never imagined he would capture something like this. With trembling hands, he pressed the record button. For the next several minutes, which felt like hours, Takashi stood frozen in that hallway, his recorder capturing every heartbreaking sound that escaped through that crack in the door. He heard Michael crying, sometimes softly, sometimes with an intensity that suggested years of accumulated pain finally finding release. Between sobs, he could hear fragments of words, mentions of his father, whispers about loneliness, and repeated questions asking why nobody truly loved him for who he really was inside. What Takashi didn't know at that moment was that this recording would eventually become one of the most profound pieces of evidence revealing the true emotional state of the King of Pop. He didn't know that decades later, this audio would circulate among dedicated fans as proof that behind the sequin glove and the moonwalk was a man who suffered immensely. When the crying finally subsided, replaced by an almost more painful silence, Takashi quietly walked away, his heart heavy with a burden he never asked to carry. He had come to that hotel hoping to see a legend. Instead, he had witnessed a man in the depths of despair, and that experience would haunt him for the rest of his life. That night, Michael Jackson remained alone in that room until dawn, unaware that his most private moment had been captured. And Takashi went home, unable to sleep, constantly rewinding the tape and listening, tears streaming down his own face, finally understanding that fame and happiness were not the same thing. The audio that exists today is a testament to the duality of Michael Jackson's existence, the extraordinary performer versus the wounded child within. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the brightest stars carry the darkest shadows. To understand why Michael Jackson cried alone that night, we must travel back in time to a small industrial city in Indiana, a city where smoke from steel mills painted the sky gray and dreams were often crushed before they could take flight. This was Gary, Indiana, the place where Michael Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, and where the first chapters of his pain were written in permanent ink. The Jackson family lived in a tiny two-bedroom house at 2300 Jackson Street. Catherine Jackson, Michael's mother, was a devout Jehovah's Witness with a gentle soul and a beautiful singing voice. Joseph Jackson, his father, was a crane operator at a steel mill with frustrated musical ambitions and an iron fist that would cast a long shadow over his children's lives. 9 children shared that cramped space: Rebby, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, LaToya, Marlon, Michael, Randy, and Janet. They slept in bunk beds, shared everything, and learned early that life was not easy. But among all the children, Michael was different from the very beginning. He was sensitive, observant, and possessed a voice that seemed to come from another world entirely. Joseph Jackson recognized early that his children had talent, but his methods of nurturing that talent would later become the subject of controversy, lawsuits, and decades of emotional trauma. Rehearsals were mandatory and grueling. Mistakes were not tolerated, and discipline was delivered through means that went far beyond acceptable parenting. Michael later revealed in interviews the extent of what he experienced during those early years. He spoke of being terrified of his father, of rehearsals that lasted until the children collapsed from exhaustion, and of punishments that left both physical and emotional scars. He described how Joseph would sit in a chair with a belt in his hand while the children rehearsed, ready to strike anyone who missed a step or sang a wrong note. The psychological impact of these experiences cannot be overstated. While other children his age were playing in parks and enjoying carefree summers, Michael was performing in nightclubs, strip clubs, and venues where children should never have been. He watched things no child should witness, all while being expected to smile and perform perfectly every single time. Perhaps most damaging was the verbal abuse that accompanied the physical discipline. Joseph reportedly mocked Michael's appearance repeatedly, particularly focusing on his nose. He would call him ugly, compare him unfavorably to his brothers, and make cruel jokes about his features in front of others. These cutting words planted seeds of insecurity that would grow into a forest of self-doubt throughout Michael's entire life. It is no coincidence that Michael later underwent numerous cosmetic procedures, particularly on his nose. The man who was considered one of the most beautiful performers of his generation spent his entire life trying to escape the reflection he saw in the mirror, a reflection that still heard his father's cruel words echoing through time. But the abuse wasn't only physical and verbal. There was also the theft of childhood itself. Michael never experienced a normal childhood. He never went to regular school for any significant period. He never had the chance to be anonymous, to make mistakes without consequences, to simply be a kid playing with other kids. By the time he was 10 years old, he was already a professional performer with adult responsibilities and pressures. In his later years, Michael spoke frequently about this lost childhood. He built Neverland Ranch, a massive property with an amusement park, a zoo, and a movie theater, as an attempt to recapture what was stolen from him. He surrounded himself with children because their innocence reminded him of what he never had. He watched Disney movies constantly, collected toys, and created an entire world where he could pretend to be the child he never got to be. Critics often misunderstood this behavior, sometimes with devastating consequences for Michael. But those who truly knew him understood that it came from a place of profound loss. He wasn't trying to escape adulthood. He was trying to find a childhood that had been stolen from him before he even understood what it was. The success of the Jackson 5 only intensified the pressure. By 1970, the group had 4 consecutive #1 hits, making Michael, at just 11 years old, the lead singer of one of the most successful groups in music history. But success didn't bring happiness. Instead, it brought more rehearsals, more pressure, and more distance from anything resembling a normal life. Michael's relationships with his brothers were complicated by their professional dynamics. Competition was encouraged, jealousy was inevitable, and true brotherhood was often sacrificed at the altar of commercial success. Michael was clearly the star, and this created resentment that would last for decades and surface in painful ways throughout his life. Through all of this, Katherine Jackson remained a source of love and stability. Michael adored his mother and spoke of her with reverence throughout his life. She represented everything soft and kind in a world that was often harsh and demanding. But even her love couldn't fully heal the wounds inflicted during those formative years. The boy who cried in that hotel room in 1987 was carrying all of this pain. Every tear that fell contained the memory of a childhood stolen, a father feared, and an innocence lost. The audio captured that night wasn't just a recording of a man crying. It was the sound of decades of accumulated trauma finally finding voice. Understanding Gary, Indiana. Understanding the Jackson family dynamic. Understanding the brutal cost of early fame. All of this is essential to comprehending why the most famous entertainer in the world could feel so profoundly alone and broken. Success has a price that few people truly understand until they've paid it in full. For Michael Jackson, that price was everything: his privacy, his normalcy, his peace of mind, and ultimately, his ability to trust anyone completely. The throne of the King of Pop was built on a foundation of isolation, and every year that passed added another layer of separation between Michael and the rest of humanity. After the Jackson 5 era, Michael embarked on a solo career with a hunger to prove himself beyond the family legacy. Off the Wall, released in 1979, was a masterpiece that should have catapulted any artist to legendary status. It sold over 20 million copies and produced 4 top 10 hits. But Michael wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. He wanted to create something that would transcend music itself. Then came Thriller in 1982. Nothing in music history before or since has matched the cultural earthquake caused by this album. It didn't just break records. It shattered them into pieces so small they could never be reassembled. The album spent 37 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200. It won 8 Grammy Awards. The music videos became cultural phenomena that are still studied in film schools today. But with each record sold, with each award received, with each accolade bestowed, Michael Jackson became less human and more myth. People stopped seeing him as a person and started seeing him as something else entirely. An icon, a symbol, an almost supernatural being who existed in a different realm than ordinary mortals. The media coverage became relentless and increasingly invasive. Photographers followed his every move. Helicopters hovered over his properties. Journalists dug through his trash, interviewed anyone who had ever met him, and created stories that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Michael couldn't go anywhere without causing a riot. He couldn't eat at a restaurant, walk through a mall, or even sit in a park without being mobbed. This level of fame is impossible to comprehend for those who haven't experienced it. Imagine never being able to be anonymous. Imagine every facial expression being photographed and analyzed. Imagine every relationship being scrutinized, every friendship questioned, every action interpreted through the lens of celebrity obsession. Michael developed coping mechanisms that were often misunderstood. He wore disguises to go out in public, sometimes dressing as an old man, sometimes wearing elaborate masks, sometimes sending decoys while he slipped out through back doors. He built walls around his properties not out of arrogance, but out of desperate need for any semblance of privacy. The relationships in his life became increasingly complicated. How could he ever know if someone loved him or loved his fame? How could he trust that a friend wasn't secretly recording conversations to sell to tabloids? How could he believe that a romantic partner saw him as Michael, the person, rather than Michael Jackson, the brand? These questions haunted him constantly. In the recording captured that night in Tokyo, fragments of these fears can be heard between sobs. The isolation of fame had created a prison more confining than any physical cell could ever be. Michael's two marriages, first to Lisa Marie Presley and then to Debbie Rowe, were both complicated by the unique pressures of his existence. With Lisa Marie, there was genuine connection, but the weight of being married to the two biggest names in entertainment history proved too heavy. With Debbie, there was gratitude and a shared goal of parenthood, but questions about the nature of the relationship persisted. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, became his greatest joy and his greatest fear. He loved them with an intensity that surprised even those closest to him. But he also lived in constant terror of them being kidnapped, harassed, or harmed because of who their father was. He covered their faces in public, not out of eccentricity, but out of a desperate desire to give him the anonymity he never had. The financial pressures of maintaining his lifestyle also took their toll. Neverland Ranch cost millions of dollars a year to operate. His art collection, his charity work, his entourage, his legal bills, all of it required a constant flow of income that forced him to keep working even when his body and soul needed rest. The music industry itself was a source of frustration. Despite being responsible for billions of dollars in revenue, Michael often felt exploited by the very machinery that had made him famous. His battles with Sony and other corporate entities were public and bitter, revealing a man who felt betrayed by an industry he had given everything to. Through all of this, the one constant was the loneliness. No amount of fame could fill the void left by childhood trauma. No amount of success could heal the wounds inflicted by his father's words and actions. No amount of adoration from fans could replace the simple human connection of being truly known and love for who you are inside. The king of pop wore his crown every day, but it was made of thorns that cut deeper with each passing year. The man crying alone in that Tokyo hotel room had everything the world could offer, and it wasn't nearly enough to bring him peace. If the wounds of childhood and the isolation of fame weren't enough, fate had one more devastating blow in store for Michael Jackson. In 1993, accusations of child abuse emerged that would forever alter the trajectory of his life, his legacy, and his mental state. Whether you believe in his innocence or guilt, one thing is undeniable. These accusations broke something inside him that never fully healed. The first accusation came from a family that Michael had befriended. He had welcomed them into his world with the open-hearted generosity that characterized his relationships with many families over the years. He had shared Neverland with them, given them gifts, and treated the children with the kind of attention that came from his own lost childhood. When the accusations surfaced, Michael's world collapsed. The man who had carefully constructed an image of purity and childlike innocence suddenly found himself painted as a monster. The media, always hungry for scandal, devoured the story with ferocity that was shocking even by tabloid standards. Michael maintained his innocence vehemently. He described the accusations as extortion, pointing to the father's recorded statements discussing financial demands. He submitted to a humiliating body examination by authorities. He cooperated with investigators, while simultaneously watching his reputation being torn apart in the court of public opinion. The case was eventually settled out of court for a significant sum, a decision that haunted Michael for the rest of his life. His insurance company and advisors had pushed for the settlement, arguing that the cost of prolonged legal battle, both financial and emotional, would be far greater than any settlement amount. But to the public, The settlement looked like an admission of guilt. Michael never forgave himself for allowing that settlement. He spoke about it frequently in later years, insisting that paying to make the case go away was the biggest mistake of his life. He felt that it gave ammunition to those who wanted to believe the worst about him and created a blueprint for future accusations. The psychological impact was devastating. Michael, who had already struggled with body image issues and anxiety, began to decline visibly. His weight dropped. His use of prescription medications increased. His already fragile mental state became even more precarious. Then, in 2003, a documentary aired that reignited all the old suspicions. Michael had allowed a journalist into his life, hoping to present a more accurate picture of who he truly was. Instead, the edited footage was presented in a way that emphasized his unconventional behavior, while stripping away context and nuance. The second wave of accusations followed shortly after. Michael was arrested, handcuffed, and processed like a common criminal. The mugshot that circulated showed a man who looked nothing like the confident performer the world had known. He looked broken, bewildered, and utterly defeated. The trial that followed in 2005 was a media circus of unprecedented proportions. Cameras captured Michael arriving at the courthouse in increasingly elaborate outfits, looking like a ghost of his former self. He appeared frail, sometimes needing assistance to walk. The stress was literally killing him before the world's eyes. Throughout the trial, Michael's supporters pointed to inconsistencies in the accuser's story and the accuser's family's history of making false claims. His detractors pointed to his unusual lifestyle and his admitted practice of sharing his bedroom with children, even though Michael insisted it was innocent, and that he often slept on the floor while children took the bed. The jury ultimately found Michael not guilty on all 14 counts. It should have been a moment of vindication, a chance to rebuild his shattered reputation. Instead, Michael emerged from the experience a shadow of the man he had been. He fled the United States shortly after the verdict, living in exile in Bahrain and later Ireland. He rarely gave interviews or made public appearances. He had won the legal battle but lost something far more precious: his faith in humanity, his sense of safety, and his will to engage with a world that had so thoroughly crucified him. The recording from Tokyo, made years before these accusations but eerily prophetic in its pain, takes on new meaning in light of what would come. The man crying alone that night was already carrying unbearable burdens. The accusations added a weight so heavy that it's a miracle he survived as long as he did. Those who knew Michael during his final years described a man who was permanently scarred by the accusations. He trusted almost no one. He lived in fear of future false claims. He questioned every friendship, every interaction, every kind gesture from strangers who might have ulterior motives. The child who just wanted to be loved, the man who dedicated his life to entertaining others and helping children around the world, spent his final years haunted by accusations that he swore until his dying day were false. Whether the world believes him or not, the emotional truth remains. Michael Jackson died with a broken heart. After the trial, Michael Jackson entered what would become the final chapter of his extraordinary life. These years were marked by exile, financial troubles, deteriorating health, and one desperate attempt to reclaim his throne. The man who had conquered the world found himself fighting simply to survive. His time in Bahrain began as a refuge, but became complicated by expectations and misunderstandings. He moved to Ireland for a period, then to Las Vegas, living a nomadic existence that reflected his inability to find peace in any one place. The properties he had loved, especially Neverland, had become painful reminders of better times and terrible accusations. Financial pressures mounted relentlessly. Despite earning hundreds of millions of dollars throughout his career, Michael's spending habits and legal bills had created a precarious situation. He was reportedly hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, with creditors circling and assets at risk. His health, always a subject of speculation, became increasingly concerning. Michael had dealt with various ailments throughout his life, including skin conditions and chronic pain from injuries sustained during performances and the infamous Pepsi commercial fire in 1984. But the toll of stress, irregular sleep, and his relationship with prescription medications created a dangerous cocktail. Sleep became Michael's nemesis. Years of performing at night and sleeping during the day had disrupted his natural rhythms. The anxiety and paranoia that followed the accusations made rest even more elusive. Michael reportedly went days without proper sleep, existing in a twilight state that affected his judgment and his health. It was in this context that the This Is It concerts were announced. 50 shows at London's O2 Arena, originally planned as 10 shows, but expanded due to unprecedented demand. This was supposed to be Michael's triumphant return, his proof to the world that the King of Pop was still the greatest entertainer alive. The demand was staggering. Nearly 1 million people attempted to buy tickets, with all 50 shows selling out almost immediately. The world, it seemed, was ready to welcome Michael back. But behind the scenes, serious concerns were emerging. Rehearsal footage that later became the documentary, This Is It, showed a Michael who could still move with incredible grace and precision. His creative vision remained sharp, his demands for perfection unchanged. But those who worked closely with him noticed troubling signs. His weight was dangerously low. He sometimes appeared confused or disoriented, and his energy levels fluctuated dramatically. The pressure of the comeback was immense. Michael had staked his financial future on these concerts. He had something to prove to himself, to his fans, to his critics, and to his children. Failure was not an option, but success required a level of physical and mental stamina that was increasingly questionable. Behind the scenes, a team of doctors and enablers had created a system that prioritized performance over health. Michael's request for help sleeping led to the administration of propofol, an anesthetic that should only be used in hospital settings with proper monitoring. Night after night, in a desperate attempt to rest, Michael was put under using this powerful drug. The days leading up to June 25th, 2009, were filled with chaos and concern. Some who saw Michael reported that he seemed fine, even energized. Others claimed he was clearly unwell, forgetting lyrics he had sung thousands of times, shivering despite warm temperatures, appearing disconnected from reality. On that fateful morning, Michael Jackson's personal physician administered propofol and then, by his own later admission, left the room. When he returned, Michael had stopped breathing. Despite attempts at resuscitation and the eventual arrival of paramedics, the King of Pop was pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center at 2:26 p.m. The world stopped. News networks interrupted programming. Websites crashed under the weight of traffic. Millions of people around the globe wept for a man most had never met, but all felt they knew. Michael Jackson was 50 years old when he died. He was weeks away from what would have been either a triumphant comeback or a devastating collapse. We will never know which outcome awaited him at the O2 Arena. All we know is that the man who had given everything to his art, to his fans, to the world, had nothing left to give. The recording from Tokyo, made more than 20 years before his death, now sounds like a prophecy. The tears, the loneliness, the pain, they were all building toward this tragic conclusion. Michael Jackson spent his life entertaining us, and we spent his life consuming him until there was nothing left. Now we return to that recording. That haunting audio captured by a teenage hotel worker in Tokyo. That sound of the King of Pop crying alone in his room, stripped of all the armor that protected him from the world. What does it mean? What can we learn from it? And why does it still have the power to leave us frozen decades later? The audio itself is not widely available. Takeshi Yamamoto kept it private for many years, sharing it only with close friends who were also Michael Jackson fans. He felt conflicted about its existence, proud to possess such an intimate piece of history, but also ashamed of having invaded his idol's privacy at such a vulnerable moment. After Michael's death in 2009, Takeshi began to reconsider his position. He felt that the world had never truly understood the depth of Michael's suffering, and this recording was proof that behind the sequins and the moonwalk was a real human being with real pain. He began sharing it within certain fan communities, where it quickly became legendary. Those who have heard the audio describe it as one of the most heartbreaking sounds they've ever experienced. Michael's sobs are not performative or dramatic. They are raw, uncontrolled, and utterly genuine. Between the crying, fragments of words can be discerned, revealing the thoughts that consumed him during those dark moments alone. He speaks of his father, of feeling unloved, of wondering why the adoration of millions cannot fill the void inside him. He questions whether anyone truly knows him, or if they only love the character he plays on stage. He expresses a deep longing for connection, for understanding, for someone to see past the fame and recognize the wounded child within. The audio forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about celebrity worship. We consume artists like Michael Jackson without ever considering the cost of their genius. We demand perfection from them, and when they show signs of humanity, of struggle, of imperfection, we often turn on them with vicious judgment. Michael gave us his childhood, his privacy, his peace of mind, and ultimately his life. In return, we gave him adoration that was conditional, support that evaporated at the first hint of scandal, and a level of scrutiny that no human being could withstand indefinitely. The tears in that recording are, in many ways, the tears we caused. But the legacy of this audio is not just about guilt or sadness. It is also about understanding. When we hear Michael cry, we can finally see him as he truly was. Not a god, not a monster, but a profoundly sensitive human being who experienced both incredible heights and devastating lows. His music takes on new dimensions when listened to through this lens. Songs about loneliness, about wanting to heal the world, about childhood and innocence. They were all windows into his soul that we perhaps didn't fully appreciate when he was alive. The audio also raises important questions about mental health and the entertainment industry. How many other artists are suffering in silence while we enjoy their performances? What responsibilities do we have as fans to consider the human beings behind the art we consume? How can we appreciate genius without demanding that artists sacrifice their well-being for our entertainment? Today, Takashi Yamamoto is in his 50s. He has kept the original cassette tapes safely preserved, occasionally allowing trusted researchers and biographers to listen to it. He considers it a sacred duty to protect this piece of history, while also ensuring that its message, the truth about Michael's suffering, is not lost. When asked about that night in 1987, Takashi becomes emotional. He says that hearing Michael cry changed his entire understanding of fame and success. He no longer envies celebrities. He no longer believes that wealth and adoration lead to happiness. He learned, in the most powerful way possible, that sometimes the people who give us the most joy are carrying the most pain. Michael Jackson's tears, captured accidentally on that cassette tape, are perhaps his most honest performance. No choreography, no costume, no million-dollar production, just a man alone with his grief, finally allowing himself to feel what he spent his public life hiding. As you finish reading this story, take a moment to listen to Michael's music again. Listen to it, knowing what you now know. Hear the pain between the notes, the loneliness between the words, the tears behind the smiles. And perhaps, in doing so, you can give Michael Jackson something he desperately wanted but never truly received, to be understood. The audio will leave you frozen because it freezes time itself, capturing a moment of pure, unguarded humanity from someone we thought we knew, but never truly did. In those tears, Michael Jackson finally told us the truth. The question is, are we finally ready to listen? Michael Jackson's story is one of contradictions, unparalleled success and profound failure, worldwide adoration and crushing loneliness, incredible talent and devastating trauma. The audio of him crying alone is a reminder that behind every legend is a human being with their own struggles, fears, and tears. May his music continue to inspire, may his memory be treated with compassion, and may we all learn from his story to be kinder to those who give us so much while receiving so little understanding in return. The king of pop is gone, but his tears still echo through time, asking us to see beyond the crown to the wounded heart that wore it.